When investigating Azure AD and Entra ID sign-in logs, security analysts often run into a massive wall of confusion. You might see events marked as correct password, others showing failure, and some showing success, all mixed together. Even worse, active cyber attacks can still contain correct password events inside the logs. To defend your network, you need to understand exactly what correct password truly means. The confusion stems from the fact that a correct password event and a successful login are not the same thing. An event can clearly state that the password was correct, yet the overall authentication attempt completely fails. This contradiction happens because modern identity systems are composed of multiple independent stages. Let's break down how the Azure authentication flow actually works behind the scenes. Authentication is an 8-step journey. The user enters a username, Azure checks if the account exists, and then asks for a password. At step 4, Azure validates the password hash. But even if step 4 succeeds, there are still more hurdles to clear. The login could still be blocked by an MFA challenge or a conditional access policy. Only when a token is finally issued does the user truly gain access to the application. When a log says correct password, it means only one thing: Azure AD verified the password hash successfully. It does not mean the user received access. It does not mean MFA passed. It does not mean a token was issued. A correct password is just a single checkpoint on a long highway, it is not the final destination. This is why a correct password event can easily belong to a failed login. Another detail that frustrates analysts is that Azure does not explicitly log password validation for every single authentication event. You might look at 1,000 logs and only see the phrase correct password 10 times. This happens because different sign-in types create entirely different log behaviors. Understanding when password validation is actually performed is essential to interpreting these logs correctly. Most Microsoft 365 traffic relies on token-based authentication. Users are constantly authenticated using refresh tokens, session cookies, and primary refresh tokens. Because these tokens prove the user already logged in earlier, Azure trusts the session and does not recheck the password hash. Activities like opening Outlook when already signed in, or refreshing a Teams token, bypass password validation completely. Therefore, the vast majority of normal enterprise logs will never contain a password validation event. So when do you actually see correct password in the logs? You see it during interactive logins. Scenarios like a fresh browser login, a new VPN connection, signing in from a brand new device, or an expired session. These events force Azure to drop its trust in previous tokens and validate the user's credentials again from scratch. If an attacker is trying to break in, they will be forced through this interactive path. Furthermore, many enterprise applications use OAuth or SAML for token exchange. In these advanced flows, the application sends a cryptographic token to Azure, and Azure simply validates the token signature. No passwords are ever exchanged or verified during this process. This means a massive volume of third-party sign-ins will never produce a correct password log entry. Now let's look at malicious activity. A password spray attack is a technique that severely confuses log analysis. In a password spray, an attacker takes one single common password, like summer 2025, and tries it against hundreds of different accounts. The attacker does this slowly to avoid triggering account lockouts or rate limits. Because this is an interactive login attempt, Azure is forced to validate the password hash. The reason password sprays produce correct password events is simply mathematics. If an attacker tries a common password against thousands of users, statistics dictate that at least one employee is actually using it. When the attacker hits John's account, the password matches. Azure records the password validation as a success, logging a correct password event directly tied to a malicious IP address. But here is the most common modern scenario. The attacker guessed the password, but the account is protected by multi-factor authentication. Azure validates the password, then sends an MFA challenge to the real user's phone. The attacker cannot approve the request, so the final authentication fails. The logs will explicitly show a correct password followed by an MFA failure. This is actually good security behavior. Attackers employ various workflows to bypass Azure defenses. They use password sprays to guess credentials, credential stuffing with databases from breached websites, or MFA fatigue to annoy users into approving a prompt. More advanced attackers simply steal the session token directly using malware. Token theft completely bypasses password and MFA checks, making it incredibly dangerous. The worst-case scenario is a fully successful compromise. If the attacker has the correct password and somehow satisfies the MFA requirement, Azure records a complete success and issues a session token. From Azure's perspective, this looks almost identical to a legitimate human user logging in. The system only knows that the credentials were valid and the policies passed. Because a successful attack looks like a normal login, analysts must hunt for behavioral anomalies. Look for impossible travel, where a user logs in from 2 distant countries simultaneously. Watch out for unknown devices, anonymous TOR networks, or VPN IP addresses. Post-breach indicators include massive mailbox data reads, malicious OAuth consent grants, or attempts to bypass security using legacy authentication. To solidify this concept, think of Azure login like airport security. Providing a correct password is like showing a valid boarding pass. Completing MFA is like passing the passport check. You can have a perfectly valid boarding pass, but still fail the passport check. Only when the token is issued are you finally allowed to board the plane. To summarize, a correct password event only means Azure verified the password hash successfully. It does not equate to a successful login. Most legitimate enterprise traffic uses tokens and bypasses password checks entirely. And if you see a correct password followed by an MFA failure, the system is working as designed to protect your network. Thank you for watching this deep dive into Azure Active Directory sign-in logs. Understanding the nuances of modern authentication is the only way to detect advanced threats. Stay vigilant, analyze the full authentication chain, and secure your enterprise.